Good morning. It's nice to see all of you here today. Welcome. We're so glad to have you. Our WIS Politics team has brought the Wisconsin with them, given the temperatures outside. A little chilly. But anyway, want to welcome all of you. This is the fourth and final 2023 WIS Politics event of the year. We've had 3 other really good ones. I think today is going to be the awesome way to close the year. I have to say, coming off of our Thanksgiving turkey, thank you to all of our sponsors. If you take a look behind me and up here, Michael Best Strategies, WPS Health Solutions, Excel Energy, Marquette University, the Les Aspin Center, and of course, the University of Wisconsin and the University of Wisconsin Alumni Center. Thank you to all of them for making these events happen. We're so grateful. So these events are usually very heavily represented by the University of Wisconsin and Marquette University, and I know we have people here from that. However, today, George Washington University is taking over. So my name's Wendy Riemann. I am your MC for today, a proud Wisconsinite, a proud Wisconsin grad, but I'm now also a professor at George Washington University. We're excited to welcome several GW students of communication and political science here today. If you guys can raise your hand. Yes. So we've got GW up front, GW in the seats, and Jeff Mayers, today's moderator, was actually a GW alum, and our special guest is one of GW's most famous alums, Chuck Todd. Chuck currently serves as NBC News' chief political analyst. He's previously served as chief White House correspondent for NBC, as well as host of the Daily Rundown on MSNBC. He's written a couple of books. However, he's probably best known for his role as the former moderator of Meet the Press. Starting in 2014, he became the 12th moderator of the show. Last year, Meet the Press celebrated its 75th anniversary. It's actually the longest running show on American television. He's also a 5-time Emmy-winning journalist. He was at the helm of the show during some of the most pivotal political events of the last decade, the Obama administration, 2016 presidential campaign, the Capitol riots. As moderator, he brought the show into the modern age by expanding to streaming, digital, and podcasting. There's actually even a Meet the Press film festival. This past June, he announced he was stepping down from the moderator role. As a former journalism major myself, one thing that stuck out to me in Chuck's departure announcement was what is seemingly now an old school reporting mentality. But he said, being a real political journalist isn't about building a brand. It's about reporting what's happening and explaining why it's happening and letting the public absorb the facts. I love that. So with that, I'll invite Jeff and Chuck to the stage so Jeff can ask what the heck is happening, Chuck can explain why, and you all can listen, absorb, and then we'll do some questions afterwards. So welcome.
Thank you, Wendy. Maybe Wendy should be doing this interview. Wow. All right, Wendy, you did more research than I did. Thank you for filling me in on Chuck's history because I didn't really know.
No, I didn't know you were a GW guy.
Well, there you go. Yes.
There it is.
2 years at GW, and then I ended up going to grad school at University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I got that covered too. So anyway, how the hell are you?
I am a Packer fan, and I tell you, I saw Mike Gallagher was doing a live shot yesterday. I've noticed Gallagher must be having the same crisis that I have, that many Packer fans have, which is, what QB jersey can you wear anymore? Right? Like, I can't wear the Favre jersey anymore, right? I'm not, my Aaron Rodgers jersey I've decided is a Lynn Dickey jersey. I'm not ready for number 10 yet, but ask me again after Sunday. So let's do the 15, right? The one guy we can all rally around. And I noticed that Gallagher had the 15 jersey, and I'm thinking, Mike, you never saw him play either, buddy. And yet we're all like, give us some Bart Starr. We can't deal with Favre or Rodgers anymore. But anyway.
Well, I was going to ask you about the Packers. So how are you feeling about the season?
I was just saying, I wrote it off about 2 weeks ago. I'm certainly going to watch Sunday. I'm hopeful. I've seen the stats of Love and Rodgers through the first 11. Okay.
I mean, think about how unusual it would be to have 3 Hall of Fame quarterbacks in a row. I mean, I don't know any other
Hey, I
franchise
just want
that could
3 competent starters in a row. I don't need Hall of Fame yet. Just give me a winning record, Jordan.
All right. Well, he's coming along. He's
He
coming
is.
along.
He is. I think.
Yeah.
I'd love a new defensive coordinator. Oh, did I say that out loud?
Oh, you've already made news. All right. All right. So let me talk about post Meet the Press. I mean, you did that for 9+ years. Watch out.
Yes. Sorry.
And you threw your phone away once you.
I tried. Right. Exactly.
So, what is post Meet the Press like for you? Because I mean, your entire life. I mean, I knew you when you were running the hotline.
Right.
That's how we met way back when. That was distributed by fax. Everybody.
And we've got people on a bulletin board service.
Yes.
That's when people used to have to download us instead of and all that.
All right. That's
I
right.
could really go old school modems and all of that. I'll say this: I've been on Daily Deadline for 30 years, and this is the longest period of time in my adult life that I've not been on a Daily Deadline. It has in that writing weekly, doing some other stuff, but that's actually been helpful to kind of step back because it's so funny. When the hotline began in the early 90s, there was this belief that there wasn't enough political news every day to somehow keep the hotline in business. Believe it or not, there was this thought that it wasn't going to happen. And then now I think back and I'm like, boy, what monster did we create? This whole taking and, what we thought, everybody's like, wow, you do this every day? Now, of course, it's an hourly update, right? There's always some news organization putting out a political newsletter every hour with some up to date. And we are so consumed with the incremental, right? That I think we are not seeing sort of this larger picture that's happening. And for instance, I write today about, we're sitting here in this moment in time and people are very consumed about, my God, young voters, what are they doing? And they're like, it must be Gaza, it must be this, must be that. And you're like going, how about we step back and look at the last 20 years? And then you realize we've been pretty miserable as an electorate for the entire 21st century. We have had a change election every single time. And we've done this, and I think the two parties haven't fully appreciated where the electorate is. I think we sometimes, I think about when you and I came of age, we were winning, whatever winning meant, right? America was sort of moving. I took German freshman year in college because the Berlin Wall fell, and I was convinced that was going to be the next language of finance, right? And I was like, I better learn German. But the point is, the Berlin Wall fell. There were all these countries that popped up. All of a sudden, we had to get a new globe. And you're like, what are these countries in Central and Eastern Europe? And but democracy was on the march, right? We were, think about the baby boomers when they were coming of age in the 60s and 70s. It was tumultuous, but things were moving, it felt like, in the righteous direction, right? Civil rights, women's rights, voting rights. Well, how about millennials? Coming of age is 9/11. How about Gen Z? Coming of age is the Trump era. This is radically different. And so while I went to school with optimism, you went to school with optimism, I think millennials started school with optimism, right? Gen Z did not. And so we've had this period. So I think what's a reminder is that sometimes you get so consumed in the day-to-day that you sort of miss this, holy cow. Have we not seen with the last 20 years? Are we not listening to the primal scream of the country that keeps saying, I'm not convinced America was ready to elect an African-American president, but I am convinced America wanted real change and didn't want the same warm-over Republican Party that McCain was offering. Donald Trump won because they didn't want the same warm-over centrist Democratic stuff that Hillary Clinton was offering, right? Like, it is one of those, the public's been demanding change, and we're sitting here going, well, why are they doing that? And they're like, look, we know what we don't, you're upset because you don't know what we want. And we keep telling you what we don't want. And that's true. And the voter is very good at telling you what they don't want. They're very bad at telling you what they do want. But I can tell you this, neither party is responding to the voter right now. And that's why you're seeing the polls do what they do.
Yeah, a former campaign manager friend of mine says, well, this group that's deciding elections, they're going to keep changing and voting for change until somebody gets it right. Right. And that's what's basically
Think
been
about
going
it.
on.
06, 08, 10, and I count 12 as a change election because Romney campaign theme was restore our future. So he was sending the message that he wanted to go back. And they were like, no, we may not like what we're doing now, but we're not going backwards. We want to keep at least doing this, right? So every single election going back, 04 was the last non-change election. And even that one was on the margins there, right? So the public has consistently said it. The parties aren't responding with the right candidates. I think the only one to inspire the young vote in the last 20 years has been Obama, right? Nobody else has even gotten close to that. Obviously Sanders to a point, but not enough to win the nomination.
So, you're right. This polling question, and we're going to talk about the NBC poll that you guys just did, but, this polling question, the right track, wrong track, which has been sort of, a great barometer. I think the barometer has broken because it's unbelievable to me that it can be upside down like it has been. And that
we've only been right side up twice this century. Okay, 2 moments this century. In the aftermath of 9/11, where we rallied as a country, and that sort of was about a 6 to 10 month period. And right after Obama's election, you're like, wow, look what we did. And there was sort of this narrow. That's the only time this century. Again, we're in 2023. We're about to get rid of a quarter of this century, and the country has said we're headed in the wrong direction for this entire century. That's, this is why we have Donald Trump, right? I mean, this is why he's a viable figure in our politics.
Right. It's an understatement to say that voters are grumpy. I've seen pollsters say they're grumpy. They're not grumpy. They're just PO'd, I think. I mean, it's more than grumpy. I mean, so it's like Biden is like the Velcro candidate, not the Teflon candidate, right? Everything is sticking to him. So, 40% in your poll.
Yeah. And, that's it for us. It's we're pretty. We try really hard to make sure our poll looks like the electorate we believe exists, not, some pollsters let it move too much, I think, and then you get some, hey, look at this movement, and it wasn't real movement, it was literally a correction. Suddenly their independent number is different and looks more like a reasonable number. So when you hit 40 and it's a real dip. The problem he has is he's now below 80% approval among Democrats. And younger Democrats, he's never been their favorite candidate. Yes, I think Israel has certainly had some impact with young voters. There's no doubt about it. But so is student debt, and so is some of these other things that haven't. But I also think cost of living, when you really look and you dig into this and you ask for voter feedback among younger voters, they're not saying Israel or Gaza. They're saying the cost of things. Try buying a house right now. I mean, or my favorite thing, granted, most people, you only watch TV ads these days when you're watching a football game, right? Because we don't watch, who watches live television? But when was the last time you saw a car commercial with 0% financing, right? So, it's a real thing, right? People's buying power. And I saw this Biden White House, and I sort of understand it, right? For my entire adult lifetime, the currency of measuring whether an economy was good or bad was whether there were jobs, right? And boy, and Biden's entire career is built. So all of a sudden you're telling him, hey, the currency of the economy is not jobs, it's the cost of things. And the irony is that for most of his professional life, jobs has been the currency, not cost, right? Only for a brief. Now, as we know, no politician has ever successfully overcome an inflation problem. This ate up Nixon, it ate up Ford, and it ate up Carter. We went through 3 presidents in the 70s. Arguably, why did Republicans eventually throw Nixon overboard? The economy was tanking. All right. There's a lot of people that wonder if the economy were in better shape, what would Watergate, what might have happened, But inflation was eating Nixon up. It ate Ford up, and it was certainly something that stuck on Carter. Ironically, it's Carter's Fed chair that ends up solving the problem on that front. But so I understand why the White House doesn't know what to say, right? Because here they have, but look at all these jobs, right? And they're like, yeah, but the cost of living, the cost of things is a real thing. And I think they just don't know how to pivot on that.
Right, but their problem now is a base problem.
They have a lot of problems. I mean, the only thing look, that said, they still have perhaps 2 issues that help them with swing voters. One is abortion, and one is the threat of Trump. So it's sort of like, it's funny, you're right. I think the base is going to be a harder problem for them than the swing voters. In some ways, the suburban swing vote, I think, is easier for them to communicate because they've actually been doing that the whole time. He's never been a good base politician. And he's always, I said this once, and Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, the social media left went into an uproar when I said, Joe Biden doesn't have a base. Like, but that's crazy to say that. And it's like, it's people that don't understand politics saying that. It's crazy. If you understand politics, you know what I mean. I mean, his base is not the current base of the Democratic Party. And that's a struggle. It's always been a struggle for him. He's always been in the center of wherever the Democratic Party is, right? Why did he have the position that he had on busing in the 70s? That was the center position inside the Democratic Party. He's not a centrist over here, but he's in the center of where the party is, right? He's to the left of a mansion, but he's to the right of an AOC, right? He is sort of always kept himself in that space. And it's hard to build a base from that space. It really is. It's why we actually have never had that many presidents from that part of the Democratic Party. It's usually either closer to the center or in an odd way closer to the base.
So you mentioned Trump, and one of my questions here is I ask people this now whenever possible because I'm puzzled by it. What is the enduring appeal of Trump? I mean, what makes him even in the mix after all that has happened?
I still think he's the middle finger to the establishment, right? And that's still out there. His core supporters, I think one of the mistakes that we're all making with his core supporters is almost obsessing over, why do you believe the election, why don't you believe the election results? And I think we have to start realizing that these folks view Trump and Trumpism almost the same way as an article of faith. In the same way, we're not fact-checking Easter, right? Journalists fact-check Easter, they might not, right? But to be a Christian, you just believe. To be a Trump supporter, you just believe, right? You don't question the facts here a little bit. So I do think his enduring appeal is somewhat of still what got him there in the first place, is that he's still seen as the disruptor that makes everybody squirm, and I'd rather make somebody squirm than not. And he's remaking the party in his image. That's the other thing. He's actually pulled off an amazing trick in this primary. He's the outsider and the incumbent. He has all the advantages of incumbency running in a primary in that he's rewired all the state parties, right? He cannot be denied this nomination just on tactics alone, right? On logistics alone. They've totally wired, right? So that's the incumbent advantage. And yet the Koch brothers go and endorse Nikki Haley and make him look more like an outsider. I think the Koch brother thing the endorsement of Haley is absolutely one of those you're like, I don't know if it helps the way you think it helps. Because I think all of a sudden it puts her in the establishment wing of the conservative movement, which is no establishment wing of any party is popular right now.
Okay, so you're not giving her much of a chance.
I give her a chance. I give her a chance to finish second. But
that's better than Ron DeSantis.
Absolutely. Look, here's the best case scenario for Haley. She finishes second in Iowa. If you told me it was 44, 28, 25, Trump, Haley, DeSantis. Christie drops out. Maybe she wins New Hampshire. New Hampshire, the single least Republican electorate of any primary we're going to hold. And then they go to South Carolina and he beats her like a drum. She can't win her South Carolina primary. How does the former South Carolina governor move on? She's going to run into the same problem that Marco Rubio ran into when he went down to Florida and Trump thumped him. And that was it. So I am very skeptical. I think, look, and you throw in the fact that DeSantis now is attacking her. So we're seeing the same, in the same way when Cruz and Rubio went after each other. They all went out, they're all vying, no, I want to be the chief alternative. No, I want to be the chief alternative. Well, guess what? You guys are fighting for second place. And the prize is second place. Okay? That's it. Maybe you'll get a speaking slot at the convention. Maybe. I don't know if it'll be after 8 p.m.
All right, so we're Wisconsin, and Wisconsin, all roads lead through Wisconsin.
Well, you guys exported this polarization.
Oh, no, that's not true. No, that's not true.
Oh, okay.
That's not true.
Before
I think we imported it for when Newt was the speaker.
Somehow Newt.
Yeah, he had some
Wisconsin.
acolytes in Wisconsin. That started the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Anyway, so where does Wisconsin fit in all this?
Well, I go back. Wisconsin, I did a whole, we have a magazine show called Meet the Press Report, still going, and I'm still fronting that, where we do sort of a deep dive on just one issue. So I did a whole half hour on Wisconsin, sort of ground zero for polarization. Before 2016, it was Wisconsin. And the fact of the matter is, it's still polarized. Nothing has changed. It is still a fight over literally 3 percentage points every cycle. In fact, Tommy Thompson said something to me that has really lingered in my head about polarization in general, and it's sort of why it won't change in Wisconsin anytime soon. He says, nobody loses by enough. And it is so true. Think about it in terms of football, right? You go 12-1, you lose by you lose by one score. You think, boy, if only this, if only this, if only this. You go 5-7, and you think, we got to clean house. Let's start over. And I think that's what's happening. It's what's happening in our politics, right? And this is why is Trump? One thing that every Republican strategist I've talked to about this, I say, well, if Trump were losing to Biden by 10 points, would he be the front runner of the Republican primary? And they all say no, right? The fact is, right, as long as Trump is seen as viable, right? And the point being is that no party's going to reform itself while it thinks it can still win, right? And at the end of the day, plenty of Republicans are convinced they can't win the presidency with Trump, but they can't win the House without him, right? They need him on there to make sure they get, look, the facts are the facts. When Trump's on the ballot, House Republicans perform better. When Trump's not on the ballot, House Republicans perform worse, right? He clearly, in some of the more deeper conservative areas, he does get people out to the polls that don't come when he's not on the ballot. And that you see this impact. And
That's not working in Wisconsin anymore because of the abortion plus Trump and
that's
the
right.
suburbs.
No. There's no doubt abortion has sort of potentially, changed things here. Now, look, Wisconsin, tell me who's on the ballot. Because if Cornel West is on the ballot, I think he draws enough from Madison and Dane County that it's a huge problem for Biden. So I do think, look, we know, right? It's somewhere under 3 percentage points is going to decide Wisconsin. So I do think who's on the ballot matters a great deal. And if Cornel West is on that ballot,
right. So
Hillary,
I guess Hillary's campaign can cite Jill Stein.
No,
right?
I think and especially now with what's going on in the Middle East, if he is making that front and center, he'll carry precincts in Madison. Nader won precincts in Madison in 2000. It's one of those, it's like, Nader, didn't just, and he didn't spoil it in Wisconsin, but he came close. If it wasn't for Florida, Wisconsin might have been the place that they fought in 2000, believe it or not. So that who's on the ballot, I think matters a great deal.
Okay, but what can the Biden campaign really do about it? They couldn't stop a Minnesota congressman from running for president. So what can they do about that?
I don't know. I mean, they could do their best to try to keep West off the ballot, and they've tried. I think, he's a former co-chair of Bernie Sanders' campaign, but Bernie hasn't lifted a finger. Bernie's people haven't lifted a finger. Some of Bernie's people are working for Dean Phillips, by the way. So it is, that could be something that they could do, but it's not working. Look, they can. There's a path. The thing is that when it comes to the 2024 race, one thing I do like to remind people, I think we all know how this plays out if it is Biden v. Trump, right? It's on a knife's edge, 6 states, and it's going to come to turnout. How good is turnout going to be among black voters in Milwaukee County? What's the bleed, the progressive bleed in Dane County? And I'll tell you what happens, right? And is there, a margins of suburban women that vote for Biden on abortion, right? So it's like, what it is. But the real problem is, and let's be honest with ourselves, the next 9 months are going to be crazy. Because you have these trials, we don't know what the public's, if he's convicted of something, that will matter to some voters. It doesn't have to matter to 50% of voters. If it matters to 1%, right, it could be enough to swing the election. I think it'll matter to 2 or 3 percentage points to folks that are dipping in one camp or the other. So I am humble enough to believe that I don't think we know what the next 6 to 8 months are going to look like. I do think there is a louder whisper campaign at trying to convince Biden to get out than there has been in a while. I think the panic
the
is real.
Axelrod thing was that an Obama plant?
No, I don't think it was. And it's funny, I think the Biden people should be careful of bashing Axelrod. Axelrod's the only reason why Biden's on the ticket. Pluff didn't want him. Messina didn't want him. Michelle didn't want him. Valerie didn't want him. The biggest advocate for him was Axe. Axe is the one who got him on that ticket. So I do think they ought to be a little more deferential to him on this. But I do think the weakness of Kamala Harris is the only reason why that the only 2 people that are publicly out there are Axelrod and Dean Phillips. I do think that, but it is the biggest non-versation you have in Washington, right? Everybody talks about this. Do you think he'll get out? What do you think the holidays are going to do? What would happen? What do you think? Is it this, this, and this? And look, I think, history says LBJ got out March 31st, 1968. That's my deadline.
Okay, but the thing with Joe Biden is Joe Biden spent his entire career trying to become president.
I agree.
He finally became president. He's not going to give it up.
I totally agree. In fact, I say this. I did a podcast with Andrew Yang, who's trying to start a third party, and I said,
Who is it trying to start?
I know. And I said, make your case. What would you tell Biden? Make your case why he should not run. And I said, and let me make the case why he should tell you to F off, right? Ever since he got elected in 1972, Joe Biden has either thought about running for president or has run for president. And the only 2 times he didn't think or didn't is because a Democrat was seeking re-election. Okay, pure and simple. He thought about it in 84 and didn't run. He thought about it in 88 and didn't run. Thought about it in 92 and didn't run. Clinton was running for re-election in 96. Thought about it in 2000 and didn't do it. Thought about it in 04 and didn't do it. He did do it in 08. He was on the ticket in 12. He didn't do it in 16, but thought about it, right? And he did it in 20. So, and he's also got a chip on his shoulder that says, you people have never thought I could win. You guys have written me off so many times. You're telling me I can't win now. You told me I couldn't do it then. You told me blah, 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 right? Like, so I understand the personal sort of, screw you guys. I've been underwritten and, this is something, and he has it. Not everybody gets the Holy Grail, and he has it. So I agree. I don't think he walks away from this. I do think the only thing that would get him to walk away is if Jill stepped in and said, you don't do this. Or if he was convinced that it would do more harm to Hunter. But I also, the whole Hunter, that's a father and a son. And, I haven't lost a child as a parent. So I'm not going to sit here and judge that relationship. But I have no doubt that it is a complicated relationship. And I understand why the president is in some ways inconsolable about it. We can't have he's just not going to have it, And for anybody that's critical of him on that, I'm like, you lose a son and tell me how you'd handle this, type of thing. So I'm very empathetic on that. And I do think if he thought this would harm Hunter, he wouldn't run. But I actually think he thinks not running would actually damage Hunter more, like that Hunter would take it personally. So I think the Hunter relationship in him actually has a huge impact on this.
Okay, before we go to audience questions, I want to talk about the race for the U.S. Senate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Democrats trying to hold on to the U.S. Senate, which is a tough fight, and then Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin. So, what's the national picture on the race for the U.S. Senate, and how does Tammy Baldwin fit into that?
Well, I'll tell you this: there's a growing conventional wisdom that Republicans are favored to win the Senate and Democrats are favored to take the House. That that the most likely scenario is that, right? A lot of it is map. The Senate map is tough for the Democrats. We know they're down one already in West Virginia. They do have 2 red state Democrats running for re-election in Ohio and Sherrod Brown, and in Tester in Montana. I think Tester has a puncher's chance. I never underestimate Tester. Sherrod Brown. Let's see. I'm
The abortion vote might
I've
help.
been doing this since I went to Yale, and Chuck, I really believe Ohioans don't believe in this MAGA stuff. Sorry. There's only a few places that I could do a Sherrod Brown. I really was hoping he'd get more traction for president, because my Sherrod Brown impersonation was something I was very proud of. He's the only Democrat that can win, because John Glenn is dead. But I don't know if he can. His best shot, there's a Trump endorsed candidate. That's obviously who he wants to run against. J.D. Vance was Trump endorsed, and so it is. So I don't think there's a path unless Democrats can make Texas and Florida both viable. I think Texas is viable. I mean, Colin Allred is a legit candidate. I think he's going to raise a ton of money, and I think and he's running the right race against Cruz. He's praising Cornyn every chance he gets. He's sort of like, well, when Texans need something, they go to Cornyn. And he goes, they don't go, everybody knows you don't go to Cruz. He's too busy podcasting, or he's too busy this. So I think he's already running a smarter race than Beto did, and Beto came close. So I do think I think that is a legit race. That is going to be a 48-46 race, mid-October, and MSNBC is going to get all excited. And Charlie Brown probably pulls the football away. But I'm just saying, I do think that will be a competitive race. Who knows in Florida? Right? Florida is one of those things that I say is every 2 years, there are 500,000 new voters, and every 2 years the electorate changes. So you cannot assume, Florida's electorate changes a lot quicker and a lot sooner than people realize. Scott is running a very MAGA campaign already. And I don't, Scott's running for Senate Majority Leader. And, he wants to, it's pretty clear to me, his obsession with that could make him a little more vulnerable in the state, but he's really good at the small stuff. He's a
former governor.
The guy, because he's a former governor, he's really good at the small stuff. I mean, you talk to people. I mean, he is. Rick Scott's not the most charismatic figure. Okay, but I will just say this: most Floridians miss him as governor, because he was when a storm came, that dude was not a partisan. He put on the Navy hat and he put on his blue jacket, storm jacket, and all he did was do what you wanted your public servants to do. DeSantis has been very much more of a partisan governor. He is someone that believes, and the Republican Party is split into two, and I worry the Democrats are doing the same, which is this mindset of you only govern for your supporters versus no, you win and you're supposed to govern for everybody. This sort of selective idea. And, if you didn't vote, DeSantis didn't show up in Broward County during massive floods. Rick Scott, I think, did show up, by the way, as a senator. A little. Now, the two of them don't get along, so some of that was Scott just sort of loving the idea of making DeSantis look bad. So I'm skeptical that Scott is going to be that vulnerable. So the path for the Democrats to win the Senate is Colin Allred has to win. and both Tester and Brown. I mean, that's yeah, they can lose Brown maybe, but they need to figure out a way to get Allred and win the presidency to pull all that. Look, I do think they're in decent shape in Arizona. I think that's pretty clear. And I think Sinema now is an asset to Democrats because she takes more Republican vote than Democratic vote. I think they're in okay shape in Nevada, although I think Nevada is going to be very, very narrow there. That'll be
The numbers for Biden in Nevada surprised
Nevada.
me. What happened?
Well, actually, Nevada Democrats overperform in Nevada. If you look at it just on the pure demographics, if you actually look at the battleground states, view through the prism of education, Nevada looks a lot more like Ohio than it does Wisconsin, or even certainly not New Hampshire, and certainly not Michigan. The point is, it's a very working class state. What has always been the key is that union, the culinary union, is a machine. Reed did build a machine, and that has been very helpful to them. But you did have the Republican who won the governorship, the only governor that lost re-election, 22, was a Republican from Clark County, the biggest Democratic county, and he did peel off some Latino vote. So there is a path there for a moderate Republican to do that. So Nevada does demographically look like a state that should be trending towards the Republicans. Democrats have been sort of keeping it from them. So I always believe Nevada's on a nice edge in either direction because of that. Democrats have a machine advantage, but I think Republicans have sort of the cultural advantage, if you will, out there. And it's becoming working class retirees, right? If you can't afford to go to Florida and you can't afford to move to Arizona, you can afford to move to Henderson County, or you can afford to move outside of Reno. And I think that's also, those Midwestern conservatives are also coming out there and remaking that a little bit. So I do think that Nevada over time is probably trending, I think Republican at some point. So anyway, you put all that up there, obviously they want Tammy Baldwin and there is no scenario where she loses and they somehow keep the Senate, right? But you don't hear Republicans talking, when they didn't get Gallagher, they sort of, Wisconsin is a landslide state. Only if the whole national environment is moving in another direction do they really think they can actually knock her off. But it's Wisconsin. It's going to be a 5-point race at best.
Yeah, maybe it's Tammy Baldwin's coattails that help Biden.
I absolutely. No, I 100%. Biden is going to need a lot of that in some of these places.
Okay, let's go to questions from the audience. Are you going to use that?
Oh,
the toss?
Are those Zoom questions, or is that what is that?
So we have, Chuck, we've got news junkies, political junkies, students. We've got someone from your rival high school here, so I know there are questions.
I smell palmetto.
This is our
I smell a palmetto panther.
right in the back.
Yeah.
This is our microphone Rubik's Cube of fun. It can be tossed, but this is your mic. So who has if people with questions? All right, we're going to come on down and start with Colleen.
Sure, if you're offering.
So,
That's why I say yes. A guy like Jeff will go and get me coffee.
so news consumption seems to differ based on location, like a rural area versus city. Elections seem to differ between rural areas versus cities. So how much do you think the news influences the elections, and how do you think it will or won't change in the future?
Well, I won't give you what I think. I'm going to tell you to take a look at a study that a couple of Stanford academics put together about the Craigslist effect. And it was a fascinating study. It came out about 9 months ago. Obviously, we know Craigslist comes up and says, why are we paying for classified ads in newspapers? Craigslist provides free service for classified advertising, yada, yada, yada. Donald Trump's president. So what happened in the yada, yada? And what they found was that the way local newspapers responded to Craigslist, right? So all of a sudden, it turned out 50 to 60% of most newspaper revenue outside of the top 10 markets, okay? Not the big city markets, Washington and New York, but the mid-sized to smaller markets, classified advertising was a giant chunk of paying for the newsroom. And so what would happen, and what they were able to measure and do through sort of a search of just financial records and doing some deep dives into a couple of different markets, is that the first people laid off were the news side, right? They basically used audience metrics to decide who to keep and who to let go. So what do you think the local newspaper did? They kept the sports guys. They kept the high school sports people. They got rid of the local news because they measured it on what was the most read, right? This is why I am a capitalist, hard stop. I do not believe you can be a capitalist and a journalist. And I don't think you can do good journalism in this for-profit world right now, at least with social media. I'm not saying there isn't ways to make money. I did it. No. And I believe, and I do think it exists, but in order to inform a majority of the population, you can't put news behind a paywall, right? That's the concern. And so to go with what they were able to measure is in the communities that lost, a newspaper where they went away completely, the local candidates were more extreme that got elected, pure and simple. And what to me, the best example where I can sort of show you this and make it sort of, I hope, is take a look at the state of Nebraska. It's a red state, the least MAGA. Okay, they don't have any MAGA. There's no MAGA governor. They've done what they've had to do in getting right, but they have consistently sort of stayed away from the MAGA. The Omaha World Herald is one of the best local newspapers still left. Guess who owns it? Warren Buffett, right? Meaning he's kept it. Right? He loves his newspapers, his local newspapers. So it is a full-fledged newspaper, and it is essentially done what you want your local newspaper to do, sort of keep the public officials on the rails, right? So I don't think I look at that at Nebraska, and I look at this Craigslist study and what we've seen, this sort of destruction of local media, and where all local politics has become nationalized. I spent a lot of time in Pensacola. My wife grew up there. We have a place down there. I grew up in Miami. She grew up in Pensacola, so we compromised. I'm in Pensacola. But it is cheaper. And she actually grew up in the county next door. Her father was involved in local politics. He's now deceased. It is shocking how much the local political scene is consumed by Trumpism. And it's just this constant fight, like on Milton City Council board. They're fighting over stuff. You're like, what are you guys? Get off the Facebook. Get off Reddit. Get off the X, right? Like, stop. And so it has had this effect. So look, I think we have a crisis in local news. I think this has been sort of why we have had more extreme politicians elected in some places. There's just no check, no sort of community check there. And look, as I've stepped away from what I've done day to day, and I've come to this conclusion that in order to build an audience, it's sort of like this. If you're trying to gain an audience, I don't know how I see it in our own news organization at times. If some story gets a lot of traction online, we automatically write a follow-up, whether or not there's new news on story X. Why? Well, it's getting attention because you want to get the traffic. And if you continue down that road, well, then you end up in this sort of echo chamber. I mean, I think the worst thing invented at the New York Times was most emailed, right? And that list. Or how about the most read columns that they always want to promote? What do you think that does to the mindset of a columnist who wants to be read? Oh, that topic's getting traction. I'm going to write about that again, right? So if you're wondering why the New York Times feels like every op-ed sounds the same, there's a reason for it, right? And I think that when we've taken the sort of for-profit model in the news business and almost sort of, it turned out the thing we didn't, I think the conclusion we need to realize is nobody ever paid for news. The local newspaper was something that was a necessity in your life. You needed it, not because you needed it for the front section, you needed it for a whole host of other reasons. The want ads, classifieds, my dad was obsessive garage, and the right. But the point was, it was something you needed in your life. It wasn't something you enjoyed. Well, you might have enjoyed the cartoons, the crossword, or something like that. But it was seen as more, you helped people live their lives. And I think about this now with when you look at what's the most trusted news source, local news. Why? Because you turn on local news and it tells you whether you need to wear a jacket or a parka, right? So it's giving you, it's a utility, giving you information you need to live your life. So I do think as a news organization, it turned out that the newspaper model was a brilliant model. We weren't asking the news side to make the money. We were using all these. So it's like, this is where the Times business model almost gets it right. Puzzles, The Athletic, recipes, charge up the yin yang over that and use all that money to continue to fund journalism. But don't put the news behind a paywall. So I guess that's where I've I know I started a very long answer here, but this Stanford University study really sort of provided some clarity. We all kind of knew something happened in rural America with news and information, but they did here's some ones and zeros to sort of prove the hypothesis.
Hi.
Yes.
You kind of touched on the younger vote a little bit,
Mhm.
but how does what younger voters look for in a candidate and what older voters look for in a candidate change what candidates are focusing on when they're talking to groups?
Well, I think a lot of it has to usually do with who they think is going to show up to the polls, right? So why is Social Security never touched, right? Because older people vote. They show up. Younger people have been inconsistent voters over time. Now, it turns out we now know what will motivate young people to come to the midterms, mess around with their sex lives. And I think that that's, sort of how they live their life. I think that is I think the core tension, generational tension, is I think voters over 50 want stability, and I think voters under 40 want change, right? And we're it's sort of like, and there's a lot of agreement, just because you want stability doesn't mean you don't want change, right? But you need to stabilize before you can actually enact change, right? You've got to stabilize the vehicle before you can make it turn, right? So I think that if you're asking me the core tension, right, Biden, the stability candidate, that is what the suburban vote wants to hear. That is what older women voters want to hear. It's not what voters under 30 in particular want to hear, and even some voters under 40 who are frustrated that it feels as if they're behind the eight ball financially, right? Look, I go back to the Great Recession. You keep asking me, why does Trump have this hold? I've spent a lot of time reading about the January 6th folks that have gone on trial, been arrested, plea bargained, all those things, and to get to know their stories, because their stories sort of tell you what happened. Just about every one of them had a personal crisis in their life. Most of those crises started during the Great Recession. They lost a house, they lost a job, they lost a spouse, right? One of the three, and it all sort of tied. And, look, it goes back to, right, if you were to say one of the great mistakes of this century, which is one, frankly, that I think during the pandemic, this Congress and essentially learned the correct lesson from the recession. Just throw money at this, right? The mistake that Obama and that Democratic Congress made in 2009 was not protecting the foreclosures, right? Nobody should have had their house foreclosed upon if it was worth $500,000 or less, right? That would have been the equivalent of, giving people the $1,400 checks during the pandemic. And it turned out because people never recovered. And the longer it took for and it's the folks that never recovered that became the angriest. And they were the ones looking for anything. And Trump was literally anything. So I do think a lot of it ties back to that. And exactly. Even if he didn't really understand it, right? I mean, it's hard to give Trump some of this credit. He's sort of been spouting off on the same stuff for 40 years. It just sort of finally fit the times, right? So I think that to sort of, anyway, I did that little aside, but I do think there needs to be, I think this is the trouble Biden's going to have is there literally needs to be two different messages, and he's just not that nimble in delivering it, right? And he has no connection with voters under 40, just none.
You mentioned Cornel West. I'm wondering about Bobby Kennedy and what impact you think his candidacy may play.
Look, I don't think he's, well, I mean, you know, I am persuaded by the polling I've seen on this, which shows that he actually hurts Trump more than he hurts Biden. And it makes a lot of sense that he actually hurts Trump if you think about the last 2 years. Where has Bobby Kennedy gotten traction? Where does he get media attention? Not on MSNBC, not on CNN, but Fox, right? And OAN and Newsmax and Steve Bannon and the whole right-wing echo chamber. They lifted him up because they saw him as a troll of the Democratic Party. Then, of course, the second he got out of the Democratic primary, right, they've all turned on him. Oh! That's Bobby Kennedy's anti-vax team coming at me. And so, no, I think that Bobby's because you got to remember many Trump supporters are ex-Democrats. They were Clinton voters, Bill Clinton voters, not Hillary, obviously, but they were Bill Clinton voters. And so the Kennedy name, you can't use the right-wing Kennedy scare tactic with these voters. They actually all liked the Kennedys. So it's going to be, if he does, and he's got a lot of money he's got a lot of money for a gadfly candidate. Okay, he doesn't have a lot of money to be a mainstream presidential, but he's got a lot more money than Cornel West has. And so he's got enough money to be a gadfly. But I think he is he either pulls evenly or actually slightly hurts Trump. But I don't think people say, oh, he might be on the debate stage. Okay, by himself. Like, I don't think Joe Biden's debating anybody. Assuming, I say this, I always say, assuming that that it is Biden and Trump as the two major party nominees.
Kind of going off of other candidates as well, there's a couple of the polls recently have indicated that generic Democrat is outpolling basically everybody on like the Democratic side.
Dean Phillips has filed to change his name to generic.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm generic. He kind of looks like generic.
I was wondering who you think that could be in a hypothetical.
Well, if I were to do a factory, right? If I were to say like who are the, if I were in the Republican Party factory, I would create Nikki Haley, and I'd say put her out there. And if I were in the Democratic Party factory, I'd go and grab Mark Kelly. Give me an astronaut from a battleground state. And it's sort of like, that's the election I wish we had. Give me Mark Kelly and Nikki Haley, and America would feel like that we were in pretty decent hands. It would feel like you had, two people who believed in the idea of America, even if the path to get there was different. So, those, but, the problem is today's politics is so toxic that anybody that makes sense has the sense not to do this, right? Like, I think the perfect third party, we're also desperate, like we could really use Eisenhower right now. We just need somebody to remind us what it means to be a patriot, what patriotism really is, not phony patriotism that we use in political TV ads. And so the only guy that comes close to that that's alive today is probably Bill McRaven, who was the former head of special forces. He was the chancellor at Texas UT system for 4 years. If you don't know who I'm talking about, just Google the Make Your Bed speech. And then you too will sign up for the Bill McRaven to lead America. I'd certainly want him to inspire my son at a minimum. But point is that that's why I like Kelly a little bit. That's why I like Haley, because they both embody something that sort of makes America unique, right? Nowhere else in the world could Nikki Haley go and become a viable candidate for president. Her story, her parents come here, right? It's the American story we want to write, right? We want 50 years from now to know that a president with her background, happened. Mark Kelly, here's a guy that, can say, hey, when I look down from space, I saw one planet. I didn't see red states and blue states, right? I saw one, so that's my sort of, political fantasy, but trust me, my fantasies got blown up a long time ago. Sometime when, sometime after Bill Clinton wagged his finger at us, I think. But anyway.
So thank you so much for being here.
You got it.
This has been so helpful. Thank you so much for being here. It has been a great discussion.
Excellent.
So I always like to take the closing question. I feel
Okay.
like that's what I do. But we have.
No one's going to tell you shouldn't.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I'm holding the mic.
You're holding the mic.
So we have students from GW here. We have lots of students from the
Mhm.
University of Wisconsin here. You were once at GW.
Mhm.
Did you envision this for your career path? Could you have? Are there things you would have changed?
Yeah.
Is there advice that you have for our young scholars here today?
Well, I'll say this. I came to GW because I wanted to be in DC. No offense to GW at the time. Like, I remember, like, I was more interested in, like, all right, I don't know how I can I want to be in DC. I knew I was kind of interested in politics. And there was only one school, there were two schools in the area that allowed you to be I was a musician, and I couldn't afford school unless I got a music scholarship. And I was good enough at the French Horn that I knew I could get a scholarship. I'd had a couple, but I didn't really want to major in music. Because I wasn't good enough to be great. I was good enough to be a band director, and I love my band directors. And I think I would be perfectly happy being a band director. And I say this, I one time said this on Tony Kornheiser's show, and I offended all these band directors. And I was like, I didn't say it. I just didn't want to do that. That doesn't mean I don't love, Anyway, but I knew I wasn't good enough to and GW allowed you to major in political science and music in the same school. And I was like, oh. And so did George Mason. And then I found out where George Mason was. I was like, oh, that's not in Washington. It's a commute. And I didn't have a car. So, boy, back then, Fairfax County felt like it was Richmond. But in the sense of why I came to GW, it gave me everything I wanted to have and all this stuff. But I will say this, the curriculum at GW did not help me. I'm obsessed, and it's not just GW's fault. I think political science curriculum is very outdated. And I think when you look at how we teach the science of politics, right? If we're really going to truly call it a science, then we need to it was not mandatory that you had a history of religion. It was not mandatory that you took any economics classes. But you tell me how you can understand the politics of any geographic area without understanding religion and the local economy, right? And so I thankfully took a couple. I think back, the two electives I took a macro and a microeconomics. I got more out of that than anything. I have always felt behind on religion. I was raised a quiet Jew, which meant you didn't tell anybody what you were. And I was not very well. I did not know knew some Old Testament. I did not know anything about the New Testament going into school. And I realized, forget about your belief system. You've got to understand it to understand politics, not just American politics, world politics. So I have this obsession with rewriting curriculum for political science because, some of the stuff that they teach is just, political parties in some ways is a useless course. Factions, and sure, constituency groups, all that stuff. I'm not saying it all doesn't matter, but I think our baseline of what we understand, and there's no media courses that were mandated back when I went. I don't know if there's any mandated now. A lot of political science departments work with, some media and public, do the media and public affairs, which didn't even exist when I was at GW. It was called political communications at the time, if I remember. Right. No, I think it's but it's now part of that school. That the building was a parking lot, and it was Tower Records next door, which I lost a lot of money in. But that's it. It is. I wish. I was thankful I had internships. I had the city of Washington. I had all the programming. Like the coolest thing about being at GW, I remember this distinctly, is On Tuesday night, you saw Jesse Jackson speak, and on a Wednesday night, you saw Newt Gingrich speak. And it was, I'm like, this is great. And I was one of the few that went to both. And so that part of it, I got a lot out of it. But I remember my biggest disappointment now looking back is we're not teaching politics correctly. It's got to be a little more reality based.
So your advice is they should diversify what they're taking?
100%. I don't think, I think make sure you're taking a religion course. You want to understand world politics. You got to understand foundationally religion, all of them, not just one. And in each of these communities, take some economics classes, because that will help you no matter what you end up doing in the larger world of politics and government, whatever that is, in the media side, in the activist side, and the governance side.
I see a lot of students nodding here, so
Good.
I think you hit the nail on the head, which is great. Thank you so much for being here. We really
got it.
appreciate it. This was a great discussion.
Wait, I'm not getting rid of statistics on political science. You do need to learn your math. Sorry.
Yes. So thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate your support. Let's give Chuck a round of applause.